His last words weren't about Rome. They weren't about his enemies. They weren't about the empire collapsing around him. When Nero felt the blade at his throat, when he knew it was over, what he whispered was, "What an artist dies in me, not an emperor, an artist." That one sentence should disturb you, because it means Nero never saw himself as a ruler. He saw himself as a performer trapped inside a throne. And when the applause stopped, everything collapsed with him, not because he was insane, but because he had replaced reality with validation so completely that when the audience walked away, there was nothing left underneath. Everyone calls Nero a monster, the man who burned Rome, the tyrant who killed his mother, the emperor who persecuted Christians and bathed in cruelty. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Almost everything we know about Nero was written by men who survived him. Senators, aristocrats, political elites whose power he threatened. The poor, they left flowers on his grave for years. So either history got him completely right, or history protected the winners. And history almost always protects the winners. Nero never asked to be emperor. He was manufactured for it. His mother, Agrippina the Younger, didn't raise a son. She engineered a weapon. She chose his tutors, including Seneca, one of the greatest philosophical minds alive. She chose his allies. She chose his wife. She married her own uncle, Emperor Claudius, positioned Nero as heir. And when Claudius died, possibly from poisoned mushrooms, Nero became emperor at 17 years old. The most powerful position in human history. And what did he want? Not conquest, not war. He wanted to sing. Rome didn't need an artist. Rome needed a conqueror. And from day one, Nero was performing a role he had never auditioned for. For the first years of his reign, Agrippina ruled through him. Coins were minted with her face beside his. Equal, sometimes dominant, she controlled access to him, influenced his decisions. When Nero tried to distance himself, she threatened to back a rival claimant to the throne. She may have attempted to manipulate him emotionally in ways that blur into something far darker. Imagine being emperor and still not free. Imagine ruling the known world, but not your own life. In 59 AD, Nero tried to kill her. Not once, 3 times. He engineered a collapsible boat designed to drown her. It sank. She swam to shore. He sent assassins. They stabbed her. According to Tacitus, her final words were, "Strike my womb." As if she understood in that last moment what the real target had always been, not her body, but the control she had held over him since birth. After her death, something fundamental shifted in Nero. The careful, restrained emperor began to disappear. Not because evil had awakened inside him, but because the only audience he had ever truly feared was gone, and without that fear, there was nothing left to perform against. Now Nero leaned into what he actually was, a performer desperate for validation. He competed in music festivals, raced chariots, recited poetry in public theaters, and he won every competition he entered, every single one, because no one was allowed to let him lose. There were professional applause guilds, claques hired specifically to cheer for him, trained groups of thousands performing different types of approval on command, rhythmic clapping, sustained roaring, artificial adoration at scale. Nero built a machine that simulated love. And here is the part that should genuinely disturb you. He knew it wasn't real. He knew the judges wouldn't dare rule against him. He knew every victory was manufactured, and he kept performing anyway, because even fake applause was better than silence. That's not madness. That's addiction. Not to power, but to validation. And once you understand that, everything else about Nero begins to make a different kind of sense. Then Rome burned. 64 AD. 10 of 14 districts damaged or destroyed. The fire started near the Circus Maximus, in a merchant quarter packed with wooden structures and narrow streets designed to trap flame. Nero wasn't even in the city when it began. He was at Antium. He returned immediately, opened his personal gardens to displaced citizens, organized food relief at his own expense, introduced strict new building codes to prevent future disaster. The story that he played the lyre while Rome burned appears in sources written decades later, under rival regimes, by authors with every political motivation to destroy his legacy. Modern fire spread analysis points toward accidental ignition in the merchant quarter, but rumors don't need evidence. They need opportunity. And Nero's enemies had both. But Nero needed someone to blame before someone blamed him. So he chose the Christians. Not out of theological hatred, not out of ideology, because they had no political allies. They were poor, isolated, despised by the general population already, completely disposable. He crucified them, burned them as human torches, fed them to animals in the arena. This was not religious war. This was crisis management. The calculus of a man who understood that the powerless absorb what the powerful refuse to carry. In trying to protect his image, he created martyrs whose story would outlast his empire by 2,000 years. The persecuted became the eternal villain in the most widely read book in human history. Irony takes centuries to fully arrive. After the fire, Nero built the Domus Aurea, the Golden House, sprawled across what had been the heart of Rome. Artificial lakes, a rotating dining room, ceilings that opened to shower guests with rose petals and perfume, a 120-foot bronze statue of himself at the entrance, modeled on the sun god. Senators called it madness. The dispossessed called it obscenity. But look at it psychologically, and something different emerges. It was not a home. There is nothing domestic about it. It was a stage. Every architectural innovation designed for spectacle, for emotional reaction, for the experience of guests standing in awe and having no choice but to feel something. Nero wasn't building luxury. He was engineering genuine response in a world where every other response had been manufactured for him. He was trying to force reality to feel real again. It didn't work. In 66 AD, Nero left Rome for Greece, not for war, not for diplomacy, but for performance. He competed in the Olympic Games, which were rescheduled specifically to accommodate him. He entered theatrical festivals, musical competitions, chariot races. He won 1,808 first-place prizes. He knew every single one had been handed to him. The judges knew. The crowds knew. Everyone in every theater and stadium knew. And still he stood there, night after night, sweating under the lights, singing, performing, chasing something that could not be legislated or purchased, or forced genuine admiration from people who had no political reason to give it. Back in Rome, governors were revolting. The Senate was conspiring. The army was defecting. And Nero was on a stage in Corinth, performing to a crowd that had been instructed to love him. And somewhere underneath all of it, knowing the difference, eventually the performance failed completely. The Praetorian Guard declared for Galba. The Senate voted Nero a public enemy, the first sitting emperor in Roman history to receive that title. He fled the palace. He hid in a freedman's villa outside the city. He was 30 years old. When he heard soldiers approaching, he struggled to kill himself and could not do it alone. Even his death required assistance. A secretary named Epaphroditos guided the blade, and Nero's final words rose out of him not as prayer, not as imperial command, not as curse against his enemies, but as lament for the artist the world would never see again. What an artist dies in me. He didn't mourn Rome. He mourned the show ending. History calls him a tyrant. And perhaps in the end he was. But the darker and more uncomfortable possibility is this. Nero was not destroyed by cruelty. He was destroyed by the gap between who he was and what the empire required him to be. Rome needed a conqueror. It got a performer. Rome needed authority. It got spectacle. Rome needed someone who could sit on absolute power and remain anchored to reality. It got someone who had never experienced reality without a performance layered over it, not since the day his mother decided what he would become. Power doesn't slowly corrupt, it reveals. It strips away every layer until what remains is the thing that was always there underneath. The throne doesn't ask who you want to be. It shows everyone who you actually are. And what Nero actually was underneath the emperor, underneath the tyrant, underneath 2,000 years of senatorial propaganda, was someone who had never once heard applause, that he knew for certain was real. Someone who built a rotating dining room because genuine intimacy was structurally unavailable to him. Someone who blamed the powerless for disasters because the powerful would resist. Someone who performed because authenticity, in his world, had always been too dangerous to risk. The elites who wrote his history survived him and shaped him into a warning. The poor who lived under him left flowers on his grave and remembered him differently. So what is Nero, really? Monster? Scapegoat? Narcissist with an empire? Or the first ruler in recorded history to treat power itself as a performance and discover, too late, that the audience always eventually leaves. The throne doesn't create monsters, it reveals performers. And when the lights finally go dark, even emperors bleed alone.